So I'll stand here. Normally I like to be there, but I have to move it, so I'm sorry to stand here. So I'll talk about building sustainable AI by the community. Just a quick offhand, how many of you have an AI background? Okay, very few. Okay, so I'll make it less technical and try to be more non-technical. So before I start, I think it's a good idea to just briefly tell about who am I and what I have been doing since last 15, 16 years. So I started working in AI way back in 2002, mostly as an AI engineer and a researcher. So for the next 6, 7 years, I worked in like 4 countries, I think, Germany, Belgium, Scotland, and India, and I published around 10 research papers. And I worked in various spaces, like from robotics, natural language processing, semantic web. And then from 2009 till 10, I did my master's in Cambridge, and then I built 6 startups. And one of them was in machine learning. And then for the last 2 years, I'm officially, I would say, jobless and homeless and phoneless. And yeah, I mostly spend my time traveling around the world. In the last year, I've been in around 25 countries, and I spoke around 70 events, and I wrote a book on AI. And one of my key focus, I'm also a mentor of Google Launchpad, WeWork, Impact Hubs, and many other organizations. And one of my interests has been over the last 1 or 2 years is to see how powerful communities can be, and how can you leverage the power of communities to build great things. So I will talk about 2 stories, actually, not a lot. 2 stories from I have been personally involved with, things that I have built myself. So the first story is a world that many of you may not be aware of. It's a world where you don't have electricity always. And to your surprise, this is a world, by the way, I grew up. I come from a poor family in India, so I grew up in this kind of environment, so I could connect to that kind of problem. But to your surprise, in this world, there are almost 1 billion people who don't have access to electricity, and at least another 1 billion who have lack of access to electricity. That's quite a big number, considering that we are in this 21st century. Now, to understand why and where does this all thing goes back, it actually goes back 150 years back. So there was this, how many of you know about current wars? Heard about it? Okay, 2 guys. I'll briefly tell you. Around 150 years ago, there was 2 kinds of current, AC and DC. So the gentleman on the left is Edison, who actually built DC, which was basically decentralized low voltage. And on the right-hand side was Tesla, who built AC, centralized system, high voltage, which was basically, at the end of the war, the AC won. And the world that we live in looks something like this, where you have a central system or a power station that generates electricity, and it's sent over through these big power cables in different parts of the cities and to their homes. What is the problem with this kind of system? The problem is that many parts or many people do not live in cities, and it's very hard to reach to these kind of systems to remote parts of the world. So I wrote an article around 6 or I think 8 months ago, and I said, imagine a future where energy is cheap, clean, and abundant for all, where each home can build their own self-sufficient energy. The question is, how could you build such a future? What do we have is every home has a roof. Every home in the world has a roof. And what you could also do, you could install solar panels on those roofs, right? But the question is, where does machine learning come here, and why does AI is relevant here? When you look back at how the solar, how people, when they have to go to move solar, how it works. So if you want to go to solar, what you need to do is you have to ask someone to come to your room or to your house, who goes to your roof, analyzes your rooftop, and gives you a report at the end of a week or 2. Highly inefficient system, right? And I mean, it takes like a week or 2 weeks to even get an idea that how much money I will save. So what about if we build a system where people can just go in and type in their address, which will scan their roof through a satellite image, identify those obstacles in the roof, and then at the end of that second or less than a second, you get an idea of how much money that you could save by having a solar power installed in your roof. Quite simple, right? So basically, the machine, what has to do is just find the home, analyze the rooftop, and based on the space and the weather conditions on that day, it will try to identify, okay, this is how much money you will save or how much money you will generate, or electricity you'll generate on this day, given the weather conditions, right? Now that system does exist in the world, actually. It's not new idea. Google has such a project called Google Sunroof. And we tried that, actually, and it works really well. As you can see, that if you have a house picture, that's a picture taken in Germany, and that's also in West Europe. And it quite well, if you just apply image analysis on top of the roof, it quite well analyzes the rooftop and creates this kind of space, and you can easily then from there create the mathematical formula. But the problem is that in the majority of the world, that's not the picture that you will have of roofs. This is the picture you have of your roofs. How many of you can even identify a rooftop here? Yeah, even for a human, it's difficult, right? So that's the challenge. So when I spoke with the guy who's the head of Google Sunroof, and they said, oh, we had built this, but it only works in some parts of the States and mostly Western Europe. So we said, okay, we want to build something that works in these kind of places. And when we apply the same algorithm that applied on that roof, this is what we got on the roofs that we want to analyze on. Doesn't work. So what do we have the challenge? So we had the challenge, like any machine learning will tell you, that you have to generate the tag data. So we have the images, and we also have to build the product, right? But we want to build it, we don't have that money. We are not like Google, we don't have $500,000, and most of us don't have that kind of money. So the question is, can we actually use the power of the community, especially those who face the problem? People like us, well, I'm not, but students, let's say in parts of the world that we want to solve. Can we bring them together who are having a shortage of electricity, who face the problem perhaps on a day-to-day basis, and say, hey, solve this problem? So I said, okay, let's try it out, actually. I didn't know what will happen. I said, okay, let me try out. So what I did, I posted an internship in a website, and there are around 1,000 people who applied for that. I was surprised, 1,000 people. Out of which 300 of those actually has some very, decent experience in machine learning and AI. Well, mostly machine learning, let's say. I will not use AI because it's quite broad. And I spoke to 300, almost 250 of those people. And I realized most of these people, or students, let's say, these are second or third year students, like you guys, who are not coming from the big cities, who are often coming from remote parts of the country, who don't normally have access to the best opportunities in a city, or even people in the Western world, but they have access to the education through online courses. And they are very driven to solve the problem. So I said, okay, but they have never met each other. They come from remote parts of the country, let's say, but they could be anywhere in the world. I got applications from Africa, okay, Middle East. So can I bring them together and ask them to solve this problem? Well, it's kind of, people will say it's an open source, but it's not really an open source because this is a selected group of people. It's not purely an open source, and I think that's the difference, and I'll explain a bit later. So what I did is I just created a Slack channel and put them together. And if you see some of the Slack channel, like, I would post, hi, there is a new task. This is the task. Does someone want to solve this task? And then people started replying, hey, I will take yes. Someone said, I will task this. And someone else said, okay, I want to solve the task 4 or 5. So it's kind of self-organized. They never met each other, but they just said, based on their interest, they said, okay, we want to solve this problem. So what I did, I brought them together, created a subgroup in the Slack, and say, hey, solve this problem, you guys interact. But of course, what are the different tasks? The first task was that, as I said, the key aspect of was generating the rooftop tagged images. So there was a subgroup created. And you can see they started, some of the students said, okay, I don't know that, I'm not that experienced, but I will help to tag the image. So they started tagging the rooftops. So in a short time, we had a few thousand images which were tagged. Some of the other groups said, okay, we'll try to improve the image quality. Let me try. And there's a group of 5, 10 students who said, okay, that's a hazed images. It's part of, majority of those part has, because of fog. And they said they applied on some, I don't know if you can see it, there's an improvement on the image quality. And then some of those more advanced students, they said, okay, we will identify, we'll do something like instant and semantic segmentation. How many of you, have you heard about this? Okay, a few of those. So I will briefly, basically want to identify what are the objects are in a given picture. Now, Google has that done quite well with on cars, it works, or people it works. It doesn't work on rooftops, of course. Google has not trained a model on rooftops. Then the challenge was, how do we train a new machine learning model based on the data that we have, which is not trained on? So there's something called transfer learning. So where we basically are training is very briefly, they just said, again, these are students, they just read a paper somewhere, and they said, hey, can we apply transfer learning? And what they did was they trained the last layer of the neural network, which is, let's say, the classifier. And then that new trained model would end up working on the rooftops. And within 3 to 4 months, we were able to implement 2 of those deep neural networks. Which are not that simple neural networks. They're quite sophisticated models, actually. One is a unit, which is often used in medical imaging. And we had almost 70% accuracy of identifying those rooftops. Now just think, these are students, second and third year students without any teacher. There's no one who was teaching them. No one was managing them. Purely self-organized, self-managed. All I was doing, although I played the role of mentor, actually they were teaching me more than I would teach them. I was just there saying, oh yeah, just do this, do that. I mean, that's all I was doing. Another team took another model, which was called mask RCNN, and they had even more accuracy. 85% accuracy they had. And these are some of the results. They can identify individual roofs. So, what we were able to achieve within a very short amount of time by a bunch of students living in remote parts of the country who have never met each other, who are not even a graduate from a university, was a model with around 80 to 85% accuracy, which is the first of the solution actually in the market. No one has built this kind of models on such kind of resolution. And I had shared this work with Joel, whom I get to know somehow from the Google Sunroof, and he seems to be quite impressed with the result. Bless you. Now the second story I will tell you, which is coming back to Europe. So this is my startup. I was building from 2013 till 16. It was in Belgium. And what we were trying to do was, as a young driver, you have to pay high insurance premium. Because since you don't have a track record, insurance companies ask you to pay high premium. Which is, how many of you think that's a fair system? Where as a young driver, you just have to pay high premium. Okay. Okay, so, well, most of you perhaps will think it's not a fair system, right? Like, you could be a good driver. Why should you pay high premium just because you are a young driver? So we also thought that's not a fair system. So what is the right system to build? A right system to build is where someone can record the trip, right? You drive, we track how well you are driving based on various factors like the speed, the acceleration, the braking, and mobile using during drive. And then let's say we build a system something like this where we track the drive, we store in a database, we do some kind of behavioral modeling, we try to learn how well you are driving. And then we send that to the insurance companies who then create a premium model based on your driving patterns rather than on an age factor or how long have you been driving. Right? It's a fair system. How many of you think this will work, actually, if I say I will build a startup like that? Does anyone think this will work? Okay, a few of those things. I mean, as a technology, it will work, yes. As a business, it will not work. Because, like insurance companies, you go to them, they will not care about you. Like, they will say, okay, where is the data? It's just chicken and egg problem, right? So unless you have the data, you cannot create a model. And why would someone give you data? So the challenge that we faced, it's a classical machine learning problem. That why would someone share the data? Because you cannot create a premium until you have loads of data, right? So now that's a problem, and that's a problem that most of you would face when you are trying to build a model. So what we understood, that if we could make people somehow connect to motivate them to share their data. Now, driving data is quite private. Right? So it's not like everyone can just say, okay, it's not like what you are eating data kind of thing. Because we would know where are you going, who are your secret lovers or whatever, right? Like everything we'll know. So how do we incentivize someone to share the data? So what we realized that to make people do something, we have to connect to intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. So what we did, we first connected with intrinsic motivation. We said, share data with us will help you become a good driver and make the roads safer. It's a great story. And actually, when we launched our app, it was covered in every newspaper, every TV channel in Belgium. On the first day itself, I think we had like 3,000 to 5,000 users. And then the extrinsic motivation. What is extrinsic motivation that would make people share the data? Intrinsic is not enough. What we did is we said that if you drive well, we give you a free coffee. So we gamified the system. So it was as simple as we had some goals. People will achieve those goals, share the data, and then they can get a free reward. And it's surprisingly how much people are willing to give their data when you give them a free coffee. And I was surprised. And not only that, they were so keen to get the free coffee that if there was a problem in the data, like we had a speed limit, we were using OpenStreetMap. And if there is a problem in the data of the speed limit, they will go and take a picture of the speed limit sign and send to us and say, hey, this is the right speed limit. Can you please update my score? And that's amazing. And this is Belgium, where people are supposed to be very privacy concerned. This is not China. But still, what we were able to do was get a lot of people sharing their data by connecting extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. And we created a community. And that's a part of, the fun part of it. So the company was called Road Viking. We were dressed like this Viking. I saw there was someone who was doing that same here. And, we had parties. We walked in the streets dressed like that. And it created a community. Some more pictures from that. So we did a lot of things. And as a result of that, in a very short amount of time, what we were able to see that we collected over 5 million driving kilometers. That's a lot of numbers. That's huge in terms of, and this was within 3 to 5 months actually, not even like, we are not talking even about years. And I will tell you a brief story that I won't name of the company. It's a $1 billion insurance company based in Belgium. We reached out to them before we launched it. They said, well, you are a startup. Who is interested to talk to you? Like, we can do the same thing. We don't need you. In 6 months' time, we got a call from one of the top guys in the car. Hey, can you come and teach us how do you do this? That the power of building a community is so important for this, even the big corporations, that they couldn't do that. I remember having a conversation with one of the guys. He said, we spent $500,000 to build this, and hardly there are 200 people using it. So we built a community, and that helped us build the data. And what we also saw, within 3 months, people end up driving better. So we didn't even have to build the machine learning model. We actually ended up making people driving better just by connecting with the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So I gave you 2 examples of stories or things that I've been involved with. And what I see, that when you create a community, you get access to talent and you democratize AI. Talent based anywhere in the world. What you can also do, you get an access to large amount of data. But the third and the most important thing is you end up building products that are trusted by people and are sustainable more. Because the biggest challenge of AI or in machine learning is not technology. It's adoption. People do not want to use AI because they think it's going to infringe their data and they don't know what is going to happen. The moment you involve community, you are actually creating this ecosystem where people trust your product more. So what I want to say now, two stories. Okay, I showed two benefits, but what exactly is happening in real world? These were also real world, but when I go and speak to many banks, corporations, everywhere, what's happening if you look at the other side of the story? First of all, what's happening, that the biggest challenge that companies say is lack of people. 48%, there was a recent study, I think it was EY, said that 48% of the challenge of AI is lack of talent. Yet, there is an increase of 10 times of number of people who are machine learning engineers in the last 5 years. Does that make sense? I mean, one side you are saying there's so many people are getting machine learning degrees or engineers, and companies saying they are not getting those people. So why is that? It's because companies throughout the world, because of historical reasons, are too much focused at hiring the people on the top of the pyramid, who have studied in the best of the best universities. But there is this talent pool which we captured in the first example, who are not in the top, who are done an online course, who are maybe in the second and third year students, and they often perhaps are remote. So through a community approach, you are actually tapping into this big talent, which often companies around the world are not able to do that. The second is the cost is huge, as you know. I know it's a spelling mistake, but I did it intentionally. So the cost is normally very huge. So companies say, there's so many companies I talk to, they say, oh, it's so expensive. That's another state of problem. But again, through a community approach, you're actually reducing the cost to like 1/5 of what is normally be. And as I said, the third point is people do not trust. There was a recent study, so 2/3 of the people do not trust a system which is based on AI. Again, through a collaborative and community approach, you are actually building something which is trustable. And we have seen that over and over again. So what I'm proposing is basically a new model of development. And this is not just about AI. Of course, I will extend this story a bit further around education and work, but that's the basic thing. Where I'm saying, if I want to build a system, what I do is I don't go to the top of the pyramid. I don't go and pick the best students in MIT and Stanford and Cambridge. I go to the middle tier of the pyramid. People who are in the second tier cities, in the third tier cities, who are remote located, who might have done some online courses. I bring them together. Like in the first example I did was I went to these online courses and practical experience in Kaggle. Or in the other cases, I brought the students, if I just have to get the data, I got young people. I'm not going to the top tier. I'm not going and buying the data. That's the first thing. The second thing that I will do is I make them collaborate and not compete. Unfortunately, the world around us and our education system is so driven by competition. We all are told to compete. We are told your class, your exams, you have to be first and second and third. Does that really make sense? Like, why are we supposed to compete with each other and go to the top? Imagine the power if people start collaborating. If in a school you are not told to actually compete with each other, but you're told to collaborate, and you don't have an exam where you are coming to the first and second, but you are collectively learning something together. That's a powerful system. That's what you have to do. I will not explain this tier system because that's internal structure. I can explain, but the basic idea is you create incentive structure for people who are in the same level of experience the same. So no one is first and second. They all are together in the same level of tier. So if people who are doing the data tagging, they all get the same compensation. Actually, and another thing which I've written here, I'm actually going, which is a very interesting observation I've seen. That I told you about this first use case, and I'll briefly tell the story at the end, but where I have seen that women were much more willing to collaborate than men. And this is, again, a very powerful something I've observed, that people often say in women in tech is, women do not go in tech, and they have a disadvantage being in tech. And because I think the world is very competitive. Instead, what I've seen that if you build a collaborative, it creates opportunities for much more people. And it actually, I think that women would be much bigger leaders than men, just because their nature is to collaborate. So you're actually creating opportunities for people. And of course, then again, I said that you create a community that also makes people to share the data. So in the other story, I showed that by just making people collaborate, make people sharing data. I'll skip this slide because that's not relevant, because I explained that briefly already. And the third thing that you have to do is to create an extrinsic motivation factor. And the extrinsic motivation in the Solar case was basically giving them recognition. I always write and give them the credit. Hey, these guys, people did this, and these guys are the ones who did it. Or in the second case was just give them some free coffee. Then they're giving you data. Now, of course, you guys are technical people, computer science students. You will think, oh, this doesn't work. How could you maintain code quality? And how do you maintain the data quality? That's another surprise I've seen. What also happens in a collaborative environment, people start doing a peer-to-peer review. Because they know that just by collaborating, they will perform better. You don't have to manage them. There's a great book I'm reading now called Reinventing Organizations, and that book says that they can create organizational structures which are non-hierarchical, all flat, and everyone is checking each other. That's something, in a way, unheard of in the modern world, but I think that's the direction that the world should go or will go. Also, I've also seen that actually the time for development decreases a lot just by making collaborative approach. Because what happens is that multiple teams start working in parallel, so you can tackle the same problem multiple directions at the same time simultaneously. Again, a very powerful idea. So, as I said, why do you think this kind of approach is so powerful? Because I'm reducing the cost of development, getting access to talent, I'm getting more data, time for development is quality is better, and it ends up creating trust and adoption. So before I end, I want to tell the story of this girl whom I worked, and I was talking about this. So I get to know her 6 months ago. Again, I never met her. I get to know her online. She came to me she was working in Oracle as a software engineer. She said, I did this course online, but no one wants to hire me because, of course, I have just an online course. So I said, okay, you can work in this project. She led one of the teams, the subgroups. She actually was leading the most successful, the mask arts engineering model. And then now she's already in the stage where she's mentoring other students. And that's the great success story, that where such kind of model, you're actually lifting society, creating opportunities for people who normally do not have, while building a great product, solving a problem. So before I end, I go and talk about this around the world. So of course, a lot of people want to work on this model. So now I'm working on two projects, which I think are quite interesting. One is, I was mentoring United Nations Food Incubator in Munich. And one of the startups from Nepal came to me and said, hey, can you help us build a model to identify crops through satellite images? And the value for that is it will help to improve crop yield. I'm not going to details. It's a social problem. They don't have a lot of money, and they said, okay, can we use a community of people who could help solve the problem? And the second project that I'm working on is actually a guy from NASA who he heard one of my talks. He was in Zurich. And he said, we have this problem of a lot of data from the space. Can you help identify, can you create a community, identify anomalies in the surface of Mars? An anomaly is normally, let's say, a human or an object that is out there. And that would help to identify aliens in future. So if any one of you or group of you are interested to work on these projects, I have a few more actually. One guy yesterday I met in St. Gallen who said he's building something for PTSD. Great story. He actually was a war hero, almost died in Central Africa. And he wanted to build a solution for solving PTSD. And he said, hey, can we use a community? And there's so many people that I often hear from saying, hey, can we solve these kind of social problems using a community, coming together and solving that problem? And I think it's a great way to solve social problems without spending a lot of money, and you can actually build something much more useful. So before I end, as I said about the book, I was reading in the plane yesterday, and I loved that book. I read these two quotes, and I was fascinated by both the quotes. I will read them. So, for far too many, workplace is simply drudgery, a few hours of life rented out every day in exchange for a paycheck. The story of a global workforce is a sad tale of wasted talent and energy. And that's so true. There are so many people who hate their job, but just go there to get some money, and they are wasting their talent and energy. But through this model of collaborative, community-driven model, people can actually work in things that they're both intrinsically and extrinsically motivated. And the second one is, what if we create organizational structures and practices that didn't need empowerment, because by design, everybody was powerful and no one was powerless? It's a very powerful thought. And I think that this model of collaborative way of working and community-driven fits to that model. So thanks for listening. And I want to end this with a quote, which also was in the book, is nothing is as powerful as the idea whose time has come. And I think this is a time has come to build such an alternate way of building products and work and education than the typical hierarchical top-down approach. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn or email me if you want to work on one of those projects. Happy to hear that. Thanks a lot.
Are there any questions? And if you need encouragement, there are t-shirts for questions, so feel free to ask them.
Luckily, no. So but I do understand it is very important to select the right group. That's why I keep on stressing on both the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. You cannot create a group just with extrinsic motivation. What happens in the work environment in offices is all extrinsic motivation. So then you cannot do that. So it has to be both ways. So yes, I haven't failed yet, but I hope I do, but I haven't.
Any other questions? Go on.
Thank you so much.
Cool, thanks a lot.
So, thank you so much for the lecture.